How many times have you told yourself, I'm going to change? Then day after day, everything stays the same. You wait for the perfect moment, wait for inspiration, wait for a miracle, but nothing happens. Because nothing changes if you don't change. This is the story of those who have dared to face themselves, those who have overcome fear and failure to achieve success. They've shared their honest moments on the journey of seeking change. And within that, there are inspiring excerpts from a famous animated film where characters too must face a choice. Continue down the same old path or dare to step out in search of a different life. Will you keep waiting or will you take action right now? Watch until the end, because this might just be what you've been looking for all along. The quiet dinner passed by, the light from the lamp hanging over the table casting its glow on the round plates, silver spoons, and the simple but sufficient food. The fox husband and wife sat across from each other, silently eating. The air felt heavy, their eyes filled with deep thought. They both knew something in their lives had shifted. Something was no longer the same as before. I don't want to live in that hole anymore, the fox husband said, his voice calm but with an underlying determination. It makes me feel poor. Not poor in terms of material things, but poor in spirit, poor in the future. We are poor, but we're happy. But is that enough? I don't want to keep living in that hole. His wife, the fox wife, turned to look at him, her eyes filled with concern. You know, living in a hole isn't so bad. We're fine. Everything is normal. He smirked, looking out the window where the moonlight was casting shadows on the ground. Yes, we're fine. But is that enough? Things will stay the same if we don't change right now. I don't want to keep living in the dark, underground like rats. I want to see the world. I want to gaze at the vast sky above. His wife quietly set her spoon down and slowly looked at him, as if carefully considering each word. But we have nothing to change. We've lived like this since we were kids. Why change? He took a deep breath, then smiled faintly. Because if we don't change, we'll always have nothing. We'll always live in that hole, forever. I don't want to live a life like that. I don't want to die with nothing more than this. His voice grew deeper, more resolute. My father died when I was just 7.5, and I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistakes he did. I don't want to live a life just fumbling around in these tiny holes. I don't want to wait for something to happen without doing anything. He turned to look at her, his gaze firm. My love, I haven't been a little foxy for 7 years now. 7 years after my father died. I realized I had to change. If I don't change, I'll live in that hole forever, and nothing will change. She sat silently for a moment, as if suddenly realizing something. So, what are you going to do? The fox husband smiled, his eyes lighting up like a glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. I'm going to do something. I'll start with small steps, but I'll never go back to that hole again. I don't want to die there, I don't want to keep living there. And I'll do whatever it takes to change. Max, a man in his 60s, sat across from me with a calm and dignified presence. His hair was graying, and deep lines were etched into his face like the marks of time. Yet his eyes remained sharp and full of strength. Having spent his entire life as a carpenter, Max was not a man of wealth or fame, but he was the kind of person who commanded respect from anyone who met him. A seasoned, resilient man who truly understood the ways of life. Max didn't speak much, but each word he uttered was deliberate and steady, carrying the weight of someone who had lived long enough to grasp the importance of change. When I asked, "Can you share something that makes you think of the phrase, 'nothing changes if nothing changes'?" Max gave a quiet smile, his gaze distant, as if recalling an old memory. He leaned back, clasped his rough hands together, and spoke slowly. You can't change your life if you don't change something. If you keep doing the same things, you'll always get the same results. No exceptions. How many times have you told yourself, I need to lose weight, I need to lose weight, I'm too fat? But then what? During the day, you eat. At night, you eat again, and the next morning, you're furious with yourself. So what do you really want? What do you truly want? If you want things to be different, you have to change. Max paused for a moment, his eyes flashing with a depth of emotion that was hard to describe. This wasn't just a story, It seemed to be his very own experience. "I've been there," he continued, his voice now deeper. "Not with weight, but with my life. There was a long time where I kept spinning my wheels, telling myself I needed to do something, but each day passed, and I was still the same. I complained about my boring job, about my meaningless life, but I did nothing to change it. I just sat there, waiting for a miracle." He let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. "But miracles don't exist. The only thing that can change your life is you." His voice grew more resolute, as if each word was carved into his soul. I remember one evening, I stood in front of the mirror and asked myself, what do I really want? If things stay like this, where will I be in a year? In 5 years? And the answer terrified me. I saw myself still stuck in the same endless loop I knew too well, with the same old complaints and the procrastination stretching on forever. Max looked me in the eye, as if emphasizing each word. That's when I decided to change. It didn't have to be anything grand at first, just small changes bit by bit. I started waking up earlier, focusing on what I really wanted, and stopped making excuses. And you know what? Things started to shift. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long sigh, as if releasing something that had weighed on him for a long time. If I didn't change, my life wouldn't change. No one could help me but me. And that's what I want to share with you today. The room fell into silence again, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a quiet full of reflection, where Max's words lingered in the air. A reminder. Nothing changes if we don't change. Liam, a middle-aged man with a muscular build, sat back in his chair, his strong arms draped over the armrests as if always ready for action. With short hair, sharp eyes, and a seasoned look, he exuded the presence of someone who never backs down from a challenge. As a fitness coach, Liam's life had been intertwined with gyms, the smell of metal, sweat, and people eager to transform themselves. But despite being the one who pushed others to reach their limits, he too had his own fears to face. When I asked him about the phrase, "Nothing changes if nothing changes," Liam fell silent for a moment, then looked directly at me, his gaze seeming to pierce through the facade of anyone searching for an excuse to procrastinate. "Fear is knowing you'll never reach your true potential. That's it," he said, his voice low but strong. "Fear is always quitting when you're close to the finish line, always delaying, always avoiding doing the right thing. And then one day you wake up an old man. And you look back at your life and realize, damn, I could have been great. I could have done more." Liam leaned back, letting out a faint smile. But it wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of someone who had come to understand the harshness of time. "I've seen it happen over and over again," he continued. "People walk into the gym full of determination, but a week later, they give up. They say they want change. They say they want to be stronger, they want a healthier body. But then what? They let procrastination win. They say, I'll work out tomorrow. Next week, I'll get serious. But that tomorrow never comes. That next week stretches on forever. And then they come back, 3 years later, 5 years later, with the same complaint. I wish I had started sooner." He paused, his eyes cold and intense, as if to carve each word deep into the listener's mind. But life doesn't wait for anyone. One day you'll wake up and realize it's too late. You won't be at an age where change is easy anymore. And that's scarier than any pain you feel in a workout. Liam crossed his arms, his calloused hands tightening around his biceps, as if to emphasize what he had just said. "I've been there. I used to be scared. I used to think I wasn't good enough, strong enough, smart enough. And for a long time, I let that fear hold me back. I kept saying I'd try harder tomorrow. But tomorrow never came until I forced myself to change. I realized that if I didn't do something, I'd live forever with the what-ifs." He leaned back in his chair, sighing but without any hint of regret. "Now, I don't let fear control me. I take action. I don't wait, because I know one thing for sure. If you don't change, your life won't change. And I don't want to live a life full of regrets." The room fell into silence, but Liam's words continued to echo in my mind. A story not just about the body, but the mind, about how people can imprison themselves in fear, and only by daring to act can they truly reach their potential. Because nothing changes if we don't change. In the faint light of the moon, the boy knelt on the cold ground, his breath coming in sharp gasps, his empty hands trembling. All of his weapons, those things he once believed were his strength, had been stripped away. Before him was nothing but the thick darkness and the gnawing despair that devoured what little will he had left. His master stepped forward, small in stature yet imposing in presence. She stood before him, her sharp yet warm gaze locking onto him, her calm voice ringing through the night. "You must rise. Your journey is not over." The boy gritted his teeth, his eyes lost. "I can't defeat them. He took everything from me. I have nothing left." The master looked at him, no judgment, no scolding, just a penetrating look. "When you began this journey, you were full of determination. Nothing could stop you. And now, when you've come so close, you're ready to give up so easily." He lowered his head, his voice growing smaller, as if he didn't even want to hear his own answer. "In the beginning, everything was easier." She let out a soft laugh, not mocking but understanding. "The beginning is always easier. But think about everything you've been through, everything you've accomplished throughout this long journey." The boy went silent. In that moment, memories flooded back. Every painful step, every battle that seemed unwinnable, every time he thought he might fall, only to rise again with unwavering resolve. It wasn't the weapons that had brought him here, but his belief. He slowly rose, his gaze no longer wavering. His master said nothing more. He understood, because his journey was not over. During the interview, Gabriel sat in the chair, his hands clasped together on the table. A man in his 30s, he had weathered many storms in life. As a personal trainer, he spent most of his time helping others transform, both physically and mentally. But that didn't mean he wasn't grappling with his own struggles. Gabriel exhaled softly, his gaze distant, as though facing his own past. "I know there will be times when I hit obstacles. I accept that," he said, his voice steady, yet carrying an underlying depth. He paused for a moment, letting his thoughts settle before continuing. "But just because I feel bad doesn't mean I'm doing badly. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. And it certainly doesn't mean I can't keep moving forward." Gabriel smiled, a smile not exactly joyful, but one of self-understanding. Because, yes, nothing changes if I don't change. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes lighting up with determination. The old days flashed through his mind, his failures, the times he told himself he needed to do better but then fell back into old habits. And then, one day, he realized, if he kept repeating what he'd always done, he would never get anywhere. "I've had bad days just like everyone else. But the important thing is, I've learned not to let the emotions of one moment dictate my whole journey." Gabriel chuckled lightly, his eyes glowing with resolve. "So, even when I'm tired or discouraged, I'll keep moving forward. Because if I don't change, my life will stay stuck." The room fell silent for a moment. In the corner of the room, the clock ticked steadily, a reminder that time never stops. Gabriel nodded slightly, as if making a promise to himself. Once again, he chose action. The man sat back in his chair, James, his hands intertwined, fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the wooden table. He was in his 40s, with the laid-back demeanor of an artist, his sharp gaze betraying a hint of weariness. His jacket was slightly wrinkled, and his shoes bore faded traces of paint. All signs of someone who had walked many paths without ever quite finding the destination. He smiled, a fleeting smile, then gently shook his head. "I've always waited for everything to be perfect before I truly started living my life. I kept telling myself, once these things fall into place, I'll finally begin." He paused, his eyes drifting to the window, where the fading light of the late afternoon spilled across the glass. "But I know there's no such thing as the right time. I'll never reach that place where everything is just right, where everything looks like I imagined it would. And in the meantime, I'm wasting the best moments of my life." He sighed softly, a breath that held a weight of deep reflection. I'm burning through the best of what I have in the present. This candle keeps burning, whether I wait or not. I keep telling myself, when it's bright enough, when it's warm enough, I'll step out. But the truth is, he looked down at his hands, hands that had once created countless works of art, but now hesitated before his own life. The candle is growing smaller. The room fell silent for a moment. Somewhere outside, a soft melody played, blending with the sound of footsteps passing by. He smiled again, this time lighter, as if he had just shed a weight that had burdened him for too long. Maybe it's time I stopped waiting, stop searching for the perfection that doesn't exist. Because if I keep waiting, one day, when I realize it's time to live, that candle might be gone. The cold wind swept through the mountainside, carrying with it a fine dust that lingered on the rugged path. The silver moonlight cast a glow on two figures, one old, one young, standing face to face in silence. The boy's eyes shone with doubt and fatigue, while the master remained calm, as though she had witnessed this moment countless times before. The boy clenched his fists, his voice laced with frustration. I don't understand. Why do I have to struggle to climb this mountain when others can just take shortcuts to reach the same place? What's the point of pushing myself when someone else can just choose the easy path? The master didn't answer immediately. She quietly observed him, then slowly stepped forward, tapping her staff gently on the ground. There will always be those who seek shortcuts, she said, her voice steady but full of authority. But that doesn't mean you should abandon your own path. The boy bit his lip, his gaze filled with skepticism. But before he could protest, the master continued. Remember, this is your journey, young warrior. No one else can decide when it ends. The wind blew again, making her cloak flutter, but her presence remained firm, like a rock atop the mountain. The boy lowered his head, reflecting on her words. The long journey he had already traveled, the wounds, the failures, the times he thought he couldn't stand back up. He had wondered if there was an easier path, perhaps one where he wouldn't have to endure so much. But then, who would he be if he had never faced those challenges? The master placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes kind yet stern. If you keep focusing on others, you'll never see your own progress. Focus on the path ahead, for you are the only one who can walk it. The boy looked up, a new spark of light in his eyes. The mountain wind was still cold, the road still full of obstacles, but within him, a flame had been rekindled once more. Are you ready to change? The people you've just heard about, those who dared to change their lives, and the characters from inspirational cartoons, they all share one thing in common. They didn't wait for the perfect opportunity. They understood that only by facing challenges head-on, taking action, and relentlessly moving forward could anything truly change. And you are no different. If you don't change, your life will stay the same. Remember, nothing changes if you don't change. A small decision can be a turning point in your life. Don't hesitate any longer. Start taking action today, rather than waiting for tomorrow. If you find these insights meaningful, don't forget to subscribe and follow for more motivational lessons to keep you on track as you transform yourself. You deserve the life you desire. Start right now.